Hello, everybody. Welcome to the first talk of the weekend for Lame Jam 2021. So we are back with Connor, who is going to tell us a little bit about jam skills and how you can work through the jam with quick iterative prototypes.
All right, thank you very much, Forrest. So, quick iterative prototypes, jam skills. I know I talked before a little bit about coming up with cool ideas and things for games, but I think there's a little bit more than just cool ideas. And now that everyone's had a little bit of a time to think about some game ideas, you might be interested in ways to make that idea actually happen. And the big secret with game jams is we don't do things the right way very often. In fact, we probably don't do things the right way at all. So, what this is to teach you is the right way to do the wrong way, to find the fast way to get things done, and a couple of extra little helpers that'll speed you along during your early development. So, let's get started. Uh, hmm, yeah, there we go. Now we get started. So, my name is Connor, and I make hacky games. I'm pretty proud of the fact that I make really hacky games. I make a lot of really quick things really hackily. They are very quick to make. They're very cheap in terms of effort put into it. And really, the only thing that I'm interested in with most of them is trying to get some gameplay across. So the surrounding aspects around that gameplay aren't as important to me. Now, there have been jams that are exceptions to that, but typically it's cool gameplay. How can I get to the gameplay as fast as possible? Now, I've been jamming for quite a while. I've done game a week courses. I've been making games as a hobbyist since I was about 5 years old. So I've been doing this for a long time. And in this process, I've learned a lot of hacks that speed up. I have an idea and I want to start playing it. If you were in the keynote speech, you probably heard me talking an awful lot about playtest early, playtest often, collaborate, show off your game, building experiences. Well, you know what? That's what we're trying to do here. We're trying to get that experience out there to players as fast as we can because your idea, I'm sorry, it's probably kind of bad, or at least your implementation or something is bad. Something isn't great, and we need to hand it to somebody so that we can find that out. And I own it. Every idea I've had is bad, and then I improved them. And the only way we can do that is by making it exist and handing it off to players. So let's talk about ways to make things quickly, and I think it's only fair if I go through my slides really quickly as well. So, leave some questions in chat. Let me know, and I'll try to get to them as we get towards the end. I'm happy to jump around the slides once we get there. But I'm going to try and get through these things a little bit quick. We're going to touch on a lot of different areas of making your game. And some of these will apply to some people, some might not. So let's try to get through all of them and see where we go. And I also encourage you, if you have any related jam hacks, if you're an experienced jammer or if you're an experienced person who has hacked together things before, then absolutely let us know some of those in chat too. I think that would be super exciting to see. Everybody has different experiences. So let's get going. First, let's get into sound effects, music, and all that stuff. Now, I am not a sound designer. I am not a musician. I have made some sounds. I have made some music. But really, when I'm making sounds for games, all I want is to support the gameplay. I want to provide that feedback to the player. I want them to know, yep, you clicked the button and you heard that click. You jumped and we gave you some sort of a audible recognition that you jumped. Good for you. It's about supporting the gameplay, letting the player know that what they tried to do did or didn't work. That's where we want the sounds. Now, there is something worth considering, and I've seen this in a lot of game jam entries from new people. So be a little bit careful with your sound effects. Let's just say nobody has ever complained that a game jam entry was a bit too quiet. So be really careful with loud sounds, err on the side of caution and go a little bit too quiet, maybe not super repetitive. And if you have a little bit of extra time, it's about 3 lines of code to get a mute button on screen, and people will thank you so much. I'm happy to help some people as we get closer to the end of the jam. If you would like to get a mute button on your game, it will save people a lot of headache. So anyways, let's get into the hacks. So the first thing that I want to showcase is Linux Multimedia Studio. I do have links throughout all of these slides, and I will be sharing these slides on our website. I'll make an announcement post about that afterwards. So the first thing that I want to show, yep, Linux Multimedia Studio. It's a big, complicated at first looking music creation tool, but really there's only a few things that you need to know to get it up and running right. So what I want to show you right now is how to make some really fast sound effects using this thing called SFXer. So we see here in our Linux Multimedia Studio, we have all of these instruments we can choose to use. These are instruments that are built into this software. They make all kinds of different sounds and you can change them to do different things. And then we drag those into this menu. This is where we actually edit our track. It's our song editor. And we can drag all these instruments in and tweak them to do whatever we like. So this one is called SFXer, and it's a really, really wonderful tool that lets you just make Game Boy and chiptune sounding sound effects at total random. You can learn how to tune the sound effects on your own, but you can just mash a random button and it works. So we start by dragging that instrument into the sound mixer. We click it, and that gives us this lovely settings panel on the right. And we go into random and we say random, and then we play a note on the piano. And it says, okay, that one is a bloop. Well, I don't need a bloop. I need an explosion. Let's try it again. And you hit random again. And you just keep repeating that. And you see what sound effects you get. And then once you're happy, you move on. So there is also this little thing under the random, which gives you a random sounds that kind of sounds like what that icon is representing. Just play with it. That's the best way to think about it. We've got explosions. We have power-up sounds. We have warning sounds, things like that. It's pretty cool. Now, once you have found the sound that you like, you actually have to make a song with this. And making a song with this is just double clicking on this little section here. You see each of these is a section of the beat, like a couple of notes in the song. So we're going to double click on that first cell. We're just going to make a big note. It's going to play the whole sound effect beginning to end. That's all we're aiming for here. We're not trying to make music or anything. We're just pick a note that sounds good, play it on the piano by clicking buttons, and you get a sound effect. And that's awesome. And once you do this, it is added to your song. You can see up here, it's been added into our song editor. We see that big note there. That means that when we hit play, we're going to hear it. So cool. We just made a sound effect. And I'm going to show you how to export in a second. But first, I think it's important to see that you can clone this. So you can double click it, rename it, get a bunch of different sound effects, clone it, randomize again on the new instrument, clone it, randomize again on the new instruments. You get a bunch of different sound effects all in this one file, just randomizing the sound effects over and over again until you get a bunch that you like. Then you can export all of those at the same time into different files. So you make like 10, 15 different sound effects just by pressing a random button over and over again, making all these different tracks. And then you can go up to File, Export Tracks, Export as Loop. It gets rid of all the silence at the ends because we just randomly put a big note down. And yeah, you end up with like 10, 15 files, and each of them are a unique sound effect. It's fantastic. It's a really easy way to bulk make sound effects. I do this all the time. Now, if you aren't looking for chiptune style sound effects, if you want something for music or ambiance or any of these, then you might not be looking for SFXer. There's also this instrument in LMMS called Zin-Add Sub Effects. Bit of a mouthful. But anyways, Zin is a ton of really, really complicated instruments that you can play. And it's a little tougher to get into them. So you click into the settings and then you click Show GUI. And then you have to select an instrument from this GUI. It's a bit more complicated, but I promise you, if you play with it for 5 minutes, you'll be able to find it. But once you get in, you can see this is just one bank on screen here. This is one bank of instruments that are within this. And these instruments sound amazing. I should put a sample in here. That's my bad. But they're very complex samples. I have made entire background songs just by playing one of these instruments, and it makes a nice background ambiance for your game. So definitely take some time to tinker with both of these tools if you want some background ambiance or sound effects. It's very, very cool. Now, if you came into this wanting to learn a new skill, if that was kind of your intention, then I encourage you, if you want to learn a little bit of basic music, maybe this isn't the best time for it, but if it's on your own time, yeah, spend some time. Ableton, another music creation tool, more expensive than free, but they have this learn music thing, and you can go there and learn all about how to make some really basic beats and rhythms and things. It's a really, really gentle introduction to music theory, and you actually make some songs while you're there. And it's very similar interface to Linux Multimedia Studio. So it's worth checking out. Now, if you don't want to learn anything about music and you don't want to download any software, check out Beatbox. Beatbox is an online tool. It's entirely in the web, and you can kind of just randomly mash stuff together, and it tends to sound okay. So you can go on Beatbox, play around with it, click some stuff, see what you get. And after a little bit of tinkering, you might end up with something you're happy enough with for a jam. And you didn't even have to put much thought into it. Okay, so that's how to make all of this stuff. But there are tons of places that you can just find these sorts of resources. We've got Newgrounds, we have itch.io, and we have Incompetech. Now, when it comes to Newgrounds and itch.io, you need to be careful about licenses because each creator is going to have their own licenses on music and sound effects. But Incompetech is entirely royalty free. I would still suggest attributing pretty much everyone in your credits because they're artists, they deserve credit. And another source, which I'm going to show later for visuals, but you can also get lots of nice sound effects off of Kenny. Kenny is amazing. You're going to hear Kenny a lot. You're going to see Kenny a lot. But I'll link to that in a later slide for sprites. Now, let's say you do want to make some sound effects, but you want to entirely record the sound effects. Maybe you're doing, I don't know, an optional constraint or something. Well, it's really easy with the tool Audacity, which is also a free tool that you can download to record and edit, well, recorded audio through a microphone. And what I intend to do, my general workflow, is I'll just sit here and make a bunch of different sounds in my microphone, just a boom, boom, get my cat to meow into the mic. And I end up with this long track of pretty distinct sounds. So then I select them, cut them, just Control X, click off of it and paste, and you get new tracks. And I do that for every individual sound effect. You can see here what it looks like once you pasted a bunch of tracks. And just like in Linux Multimedia Studio, you can export each of these as their own file in one button press. So you just go to File, Export, Export Multiple, and you can handle it from there. And again, another great way to turn a 2-minute recording session into like 10 different sound effects really, really quickly. And you can use them for a surprising amount of stuff, especially once you start applying some weird effects. There's lots of filters in Audacity if you want to play around. Now, I also include it here. If you don't have an amazing microphone, if you have a bit of a noisy area, if you have vents or something going, it's actually extremely easy in Audacity to remove background noise and make your microphone sound way better. So I included a link to the step-by-step guide to use the noise reduction filter in Audacity. It's only 4 clicks. Like it's not a lot of work. So if you want to have really clean sounding audio, yeah, you can go with this. It's a great way to make some quick sounds. So let's say that you don't want to go through the process of finding music, but you still want something playing in the background. Maybe you have a bit of a spooky atmosphere or just something a little bit more adventurous, and you just want a slow ambient vibe in the background. Well, you don't even have to bother with any kind of instrumenting or anything. Instead, we're going to use a tool built into Audacity called Pulse Stretch. And Pulse Stretch just takes your audio and stretches it by whatever stretch factor you put in here. So I'm going to play for you a little bit of stretched audio. This is some background. Hopefully everyone can hear it. Spooky. All right. So we have some very good kind of temple music or something like that. Now, what did I record to create that and stretch it out with this filter? Literally anything can sound good through this. Yeah, that 4-second audio recording turned into 50 seconds of background music. So try different songs, try different things, different sound effects. I've used sound effects that I generated in LMMS, and I said, I need some background tracks. So I pulled a bleep bloop into Audacity, stretched it, and it gave me something a little less spooky and a little more uplifting and interesting. So experiment. This is a great way to get some fast sounds into your game. In 10 minutes, you could have a range of sound effects, even if they're just placeholders at the beginning. And now I would be remiss if I didn't include this jam hack, which is ask. There is a surprising amount of artists who are willing to take on multiple roles, especially when it comes to sound and music. A lot of people are willing to jump between multiple teams and get some audio up if they've got some downtime. So there's nothing wrong with just putting an open call into your general chat, or if we were in person walking around the jam and saying, hey, you look like you're sitting there with a Casio, um, and try to get them on board to make some music for you. I'm sure some people will be interested. Just don't be pushy. We're all friendly here. Now, assets. The goal of assets. Well, are we going to try and make it look good? No, that's not the goal here. Well, maybe it is for you if you're an artist trying to make a really nice, pretty game. Go for it. All power to you. If you're not an artist and you are really struggling with getting passable graphics, or if you're in the first day of your game jam and you just don't have time to make nice looking assets, but you still need something in the engine to work, then let's see how we can make passable work for us. Now, the goal with graphics, similar to audio, really in a game is to just let people know what's happening, to make sure that they have the feedback, that they know what actions are available to them, to give context for what's going on. Oh, a red crate, that's probably going to blow up because I've played games that use red crates before. We're really just using these visuals to signal to the player what should you be evaluating, what's going on in the game right now. So when you're creating these simplistic, basic forms of assets, still keep in mind that the intention of them is to convey some meaning to the player. I've absolutely seen game jam entries where they tried to get this basic programmer art, as we call it, going, and you couldn't really make out what was happening in the game. And unfortunately, they ran out of time to actually make better assets, so they had to ship with those programmer art assets, which is perfectly fine. But you couldn't really tell what was happening in the game. And even though it very well could be fun games, this happened many times, you struggle to actually play it because you can't tell what's happening. So even if you're going to make these low fidelity things, even if you're going to make really quick hacky stuff, still make sure that someone who hasn't been developing the game can jump in and say, oh yeah, I know what to do. I know what's happening. So playtest, hand it off to other people, even as early as just showing a screenshot and say, hey, do you know what is happening in this game? Definitely collaborate and share. So you want to provide that feedback. You want to provide that context, much the same as audio. The exception being people tend to accept kind of cruddy visuals if they still get a game out of it. Now, to get started, we're going to do something loosely called gray boxing. This is a form of gray boxing, at least, where we're going to figure out how big we want our sprites to be, how big is a player, how big is a crate, how big is the floor, all of these things. And right away, right as we're planning out our game, before we get going into coding and everything, we're just going to make a bunch of squares. We're going to make a bunch of squares and rectangles, whatever the size of each sprite is going to be. And we're just going to make a color, hopefully with some border to differentiate them. But open up Paint, make it the size of the sprite, or GIMP, which I'll be showing shortly. Make it the size of the sprite, fill it in with a color, maybe put a little label on it so you know what's going on here. And then just start developing the game with that. Because if you have an artist on your team, or if you're going to be going back and finding assets, then start with this. Start with Paint. Start with something that you can whip up in seconds. And if it's the right size, then the new sprites should still work well for you. And then you get to establish your sizes up front, and you're not going to be in a conflict if your artist ends up, if they don't know what size you're expecting and now your levels don't work. So use some really basic squares. Trust me, it works. Now, I'm going to talk a little bit about some techniques that you can do in GIMP to make slightly better assets than just the squares. This is if you are alone on a team and you are a developer and you have absolutely no way to get assets. And I'm going to show some other ways after. But we're going to get GIMP. It's a free open source software. That's kind of the theme of this jam. I guess I keep showing free open source stuff. But we've got GIMP. Download it. It's basically a free open source Photoshop. And one of the things that you can do is just grab some stock photos or some clip art or something. I go to public domain because I don't like tracing non-public domain stuff. So I go to something like Pixabay and I just create a new layer in the little layers panel down here. And I just start tracing. And that becomes my sprite for a while. And then I put that into the game. And I'll come back later and I'll update it if I have time. but you can get a pretty good shape, some decent coloring. You can eyedropper the fur. You can do whatever you need to get some basic coloring going. And then you have some kind of a basic sprite. Maybe it's not animated, but at least it's doing something. And once you have that outlined, you might be able to do some very simple animations once you get there. But animations are a bit more complicated. Now, another very important tool, if you have never worked in an image editing program before, is the Magic Wand tool. This thing is lovely. So Magic Wand is going to let you grab areas that are similar to one another. So in this case, I am going to select outside of this robot. It was just a black background, and I didn't like that. So I got rid of that black background and deleted it. Sorry. Now, what that did for me was let me have this sprite that I can then just pull into my game engine, and it's going to look nice. This sprite, by the way, is a Kenny sprite. Links are coming up soon. So you can use that to select. There's lots of options on the side to let you fine tune it to whatever you need to select. So that's good. And now right next to it up here, there is color select, which is basically a magic wand, but it lets you select a specific color on the image. And you can adjust the thresholds. You can adjust all sorts of extra stuff. You can feather the edges so that it gives a little bit of transparency at the edge if it's not a perfect cutoff of the color. So you can use that to select a particular color or similar colors in your image. And then you come into here and you use colors right at the top, and you go down to colorize. And that lets you take whatever was in that color, you've selected it, and it applies a new color over top of it. And if you need to just quickly whip out 10 variations of an enemy, you can't go wrong with just recoloring certain parts of it. You can magic wand some sections, you can brush over some sections, you can take some items that you had and just make upgraded versions by recoloring it. It is astounding how many games, even AAA games, can get by just changing a color of something to make it seem more important. So you can use this colorize and these magic wand tools to fake your way into AAA hacking. And of course, you can also use hand-drawn assets. So this is an example from Ludum Dare 49, the most recent Ludum Dare that happened. And you can just take hand-drawn assets. This one might have actually been digital, but the point remains. You can take hand-drawn assets and scan them in. There have been plenty of times that I've seen games that use this, even 3D games that use hand-drawn textures for all of the 3D, and it looks really, really cool. So if you are okay at doodling or sketching or anything, you can absolutely do this. Likewise, if you are an artist and you're a little bit worried about using digital tools, if you're primarily an analog artist, then have no fear. Just draw something, scan it, bring it into GIMP, magic wand around it, and you're good. You can pull that into a game engine. That's totally fine. Just make sure it's sized right, so you're not trying to bring in a 50 megapixel scan of a sprite. It should be small. Now, let's say you have just a little tiny bit of an artistic bone in you and you want to try making some art from scratch. I highly recommend trying some very basic pixel art. This is how I've been able to amaze and enamor people, making them think I have any kind of art skills, is by doing some basic pixel arts that works well enough for a game jam at least. So you take a tool like Piskel. It's a free web tool. There's plenty of great pixel art tools out there, including some that were developed in Godot. But I like Piskel. I like talking about it because it's all in the web browser. So you don't even have to download anything. You just jump in, make a coin, make a smiley face, make a set of headphones, whatever you need. And it's very, very quick to get up and running with. Smaller resolutions I find are tough to convey information, but they let you get something that is reasonable really, really quickly. So pixel art, excellent way to do some really basic stuff. There's lots of inspiration out there for you. And you can do it right in the browser. So that's convenient. And again, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about Kenny. I can't talk about Kenny enough. Kenny has saved more game jammers. It's amazing. Full website filled with 2D, 3D assets, lots of sound effects, UI elements, anything that you can imagine. Kenny probably has it on his website. So check out kenny.nl and just take a scroll and see if there's anything that you want to use. I frequently take stuff off of Kenny and then I make modifications to it in GIMP. So Don't just think that you have to stick with what you have. Feel free to look around for some free assets. You can also check HIO, Open Game Art, all kinds of great places. GameIcons.net is another great resource that I use all the time because you need lots of icons in games. It helps to tutorialize the player. It helps to show things to the player really easily. And sometimes just the perfect icon can get you there really quick. So we have gameicons.net. Now, all of these are Creative Commons, but you do need to provide credit. So I encourage you to provide credit for any assets that you take and use. But this one does require it. So do make sure that you get the author's name in your game credits. Now, I am going to admit something a little bit embarrassing. I have wasted probably 25% or 30% of some game jams looking for the right asset, looking for the best asset, the one that I need, even just an asset that gets across what I need. And maybe that asset in the past has been a pixel art headphones icon, which is literally two rectangles next to each other and a little line in between. Or maybe it was a coin, which, if you had looked at any pixel art coins, it's just an oval with a line in the middle. It's yellow. Now, I have scoured the internet for things like that before because it never came to mind that I could just open up a pixel art editor or open up GIMP or something or Paint and just make it. So before you go down the rabbit hole of looking for the perfect assets or even the first asset, take 1 second to think, could I make a passable version of this really quickly? And if you can, do it. And then come back to trying to improve it later. But give yourself that little time to think, could I just make this really fast? You'd be surprised how many of those you can that you don't think of. It is just an absolute time sink. Even if you don't intend to go down the rabbit hole, you'll go down the rabbit hole. Okay, doing good on time. Now, I want to kind of wrap this up by going through some really quick hacks that I do in Godot, not just for game jams, but also when I'm just trying to test out a game idea, if I have something in mind, like this lovely pink, purple, sunny day horror game that I'm currently developing. So let's go over some really basic things I've learned about hacking together prototypes in Godot. And yeah, let's start. First and foremost, this is a thing that I still fail to do in just about every game jam, which is go to the Godot asset library linked here or found in Godot and try to find the thing. Now, I know I just said that you can go down the rabbit hole of trying to find the right picture, but I'm talking about finding a third-person controller that gives you a gun, a flashlight, and a laser pointer with one button press. And you hit install, and you drag this thing in, and suddenly you have a game where you can run around a game world, shoot a gun, reload, crouch, jump, turn on and off a flashlight. That is a one-button thing that you can add into your game through the Godot Asset Store. If I had just taken some time in previous jams to look for existing things, I would have saved so much. I would have gotten a much better game out of it. So don't be afraid to do a little searching and maybe look up a GD Quest or a YouTube video on how to install plugins if you need a little bit of extra help. But it's very quick, it's very easy, and you can do it all from within Godot with just a couple of button presses. So I highly encourage taking a quick look around there. You might find something that's going to save you hours or even days of coding to get up and running. Now, one of the things that I frequently need to do in a game jam is transition between screens, transition between levels. And now this isn't particularly difficult in Godot naturally. It's just kind of take that data and then unload that data, find some new data and load it in. But that's still a decent amount of code, and there's quite a bit that can go wrong there. Now, if you have a relatively simple game, just a couple of screens that you're trying to transition through, maybe a couple of levels, the approach I like to take, which this is a real example, is to just have these nodes here. And when I'm on this screen, when I'm on screen 1, then I have the visibility toggled. I say, I have code in my main thing that just says, when I press this button or when I do this thing, toggle the visibility of screen 1 and run some function to get things started on it. It's really simple. It's like 1, 2 lines of code, and there's no complicated stuff. It's literally toggling visibility and calling the function that you need to run anyways to make your game run. So I will just have a bunch of these listed out in my main file, and they will all control one another, toggle one another. Now, when you have a lot of these, if you make 20 levels in your game, which impressed, but if you make a bunch of contents for your game, this gets really difficult to maintain really quick. You don't know why some things are visible and some things aren't, and for whatever reason, it becomes quite a mess. So I encourage this for very small games. If you have maybe a menu and then a game and then a credits. If you have 3 scene transitions, it's very, very easy to just toggle visibility and go. But if you start getting really complicated, if you have lots of level after level after level, you might want to look into proper scene transitioning. But quick hack, it'll get you going fast for these sorts of things. Now, another secret that I have is I really abuse this thing called the color rect. I use it far too much. It's a built-in node to Godot. It's meant to be used as user interface boxes. And here I used it to make a tree. Pretty cool. So it turns out that if you just have a flat color rectangle and you're willing to use it for things it's not meant to be used for, you can do quite a lot with it. So I've developed entire loading screens and menu screens and all kinds of stuff, just putting a bunch of rectangles up there and seeing what happens. And it works surprisingly well. You would be amazed how many times these color rectangles come in handy. One of the other places that I use color rectangles constantly, and this is the hacky way. There are non-hacky ways. I'm not even going to talk about those. But you can take one of these, stretch it across the whole screen, and then make it transparent. So when you adjust the color of a color rect, you can see you can control the red, the green, the blue, and the alpha, and that's the transparency of it. So when it's at max, that means that it's fully visible. You can see the color, it's 100%. So what I tend to do is I make a rectangle, I stretch it out to cover the entire screen, I set it to black, I just move it into the bottom corner here, and then I set the alpha to 0, and I make it completely invisible. And then if you learn a little bit about animations, which I encourage, go learn a tiny bit about animations if you can. They're pretty simple to use in Godot. At least have one person check them out. Then you can animate this. So you say start from completely transparent at 0, and at 1 second, make it completely visible. Turn that alpha from 0 to 255, which is the maximum. And then over that second, you will see the black rectangle appear, but really when you're playing the game, that means that you got a fade to black. Such an easy way to add a little layer of polish. I don't think I've done a game jam game that didn't have a fade to black because it's one keyframe moving an alpha from 0 to 255. It's so easy. It's again like 3 or 4 clicks if you know where to click, and it's really quick to get these nice looking fades going. So highly recommend looking into color rectangle abuse. Now, another feature in Godot that's very, very useful is exports. So this is getting a little bit more technical than maybe you want to check into. So don't stress about this, but I will tell you what you gain from using export variables. Export variables, you put export in front of a variable, just the keyword export var attack cooldown. You don't need all of this stuff. You just say export var attack cooldown. And now it's going to appear in the editor as a number that you can adjust or something that you can adjust. And that is super, super useful, especially when you turn on this feature here. So if you go into the top menu of Godot and you say debug, and you can make sure that these 2 things are checked: synchronized scene changes, synchronized script changes. And what that means is that you can continue running your game. You can just keep it up and running and tweak every variable that you exported, and it will update live in the game while you are playing it. So if you want to see, is this jump, does it feel good? Am I jumping fast enough? Then you export your jump speed and you open up your game and you hit spacebar a few times, and then you switch and you change the jump speed, and then you hit spacebar a few times. You don't have to rerun the game. It's awesome. I can't even. It's amazing. So export your variables and synchronize. And there is some documentation. I have a link to more info here. But there is all sorts of stuff that you can put in these little parentheses here. Like you see, I'm exporting attacks. you can put all kinds of things like give me a number between 0 and 100. And now that you'll get a slider here that only goes between 0 and 100. So you can even constrain it. So again, little bit more advanced. You can get started by just saying export this variable, and you can start tweaking stuff in the editor. Very, very handy. Now, alongside that is controller input. It's surprisingly easy to do controller input in Godot. If you go into your input manager, which is in your project settings, which if you follow the tutorials, you should be able to get these inputs. You go into the inputs and you can add. So in this case, we have enter, space, and the B button on Nintendo or the A button on an Xbox controller. All of these are going to give this thing UI accept. Now, why is this so nice? Because if you are using a controller by default, Godot has a lot of nice default actions. But then if you have a second monitor, you hold up this game, you keep it on that second monitor, and now you could just pull out your controller, test out that jump, and then set the controller down and keep coding. You don't have to Alt-Tab. You don't have to switch your mouse over to one or the other. You could just sit there and press the button. Wonderful. Now, I'm also going to put this one out here. This has saved me a lot of time and effort and madness while I am developing, especially when you've been developing a little bit too long. Your head isn't exactly there. Is locking. You can click on the node. This is the node pane. I think I cropped a little too much. You click on this node here and you say, okay, this rectangle covers the entire screen. It's going to be used for fading. I am never going to move it. It is exactly where it needs to be. And then you go up and you click lock. And now you can't accidentally click it and drag it and move it all over the place, which, especially when you're doing stuff like putting a full screen rectangle, is so annoying. So locking is really handy, and it takes a couple of seconds to learn how to do it. You just click the node, click the lock, and now you can't accidentally move it. It's going to save you a lot of accidents and having to go back and adjust stuff. And it's just really annoying to move stuff you didn't want to move. Now, likewise, when I was talking about abusing color rectangles, it's worth noting that color rectangles live in the user interface. They were built to live in the user interface. So they're better for painting or having a little backup or like fade, a full screen fade, or having random pop-ups. But they actually can't have collisions. They are really bad at moving around the screen. You can, but they aren't built for it. So instead, you can do what every Godot developer does. I think I'm pretty safe in saying that. And you make use of the Godot icon that it gives you. If you open up a brand new project, you'll see the Godot icon in your file explorer. And I don't think I know a Godot developer who hasn't just dragged that icon in. It becomes a sprite in your editor, and then you just start prototyping with that thing. I've seen people make entire games and submit them to game jams that exclusively used the Godot icon for all of their sprites. And I mean, why not? It's given to you. You can just open up the engine and start using it. And you can also do stuff like adjust this color modulation. So if you go down and scroll down to the bottom properties of the node, you'll see canvas item. And you have this modulate property, and that lets you just set a color, and it's going to overlay that color over top of that sprite. So really, really handy way to get super quick programmer art going. You don't even need to open up Paint. You can just start mucking around with this, which is quite fun. Now, we're coming up to the end of the talk, and I do want to see if there's any questions or if anyone wants me to go back to slides and go a little more in depth. But I do want to leave by saying, do what you know. If it's already out there, if it's a node in Godot, use the node. This is a very, very common mistake that I find, especially with programmers who are starting game development for the first time, which I've encountered very, very many in my teaching career. We tend to, as programmers, want to make the solution. Or we think, okay, yeah, well, you know, I've programmed some stuff before. I'm probably going to have to code this. You'd be very surprised how many things are built into Godot as nodes that you can make use of. So if you think there's any kind of a interaction that you want, then take a quick look through the Godot or post in general and ask if anyone, including us mentors and organizers, have a node in mind that would get that across. One quick example, for the first year that I used Godot, I had all sorts of code to do my cooldowns, to say only do this after 10 seconds. And I wrote all sorts of code that managed that for me. And then I realized there was a node and it's a timer. And if I pull that timer in, I get a little variable exported in the inspector. And I could say, this is a 10-second timer. And then from my code, all I have to say is start the timer. And when the timer ends, call a function. So much time saved by starting to use the nodes that the game engine gave me. So if you think you're encountering something that might be there, ask, go through the documentation, just scroll through the nodes in Godot, take a look through them and see what's there. There's also some great videos on the top nodes in Godot that might be worth looking through. And now when it comes to hacking your way and getting a really, really quick implementation for the game jam, because our goal is to get something quick and improve it during the jam, not just to get something during the jam, then focus on the gameplay. Unless you're making an aesthetic piece, a narrative piece, whatever, in which case you might want to use something else that's more suited to it. If you're making an RPG, use RPG Maker. If you're making a dialogue-based game and you know Python, use RenPy. But if you're making just a game, a fun mechanical game, then focus on that gameplay, do quick and dirty, hack your way through it, and get something nice and easy and up so that you can hand your game off to people as fast as possible and make it better. So that's pretty much everything. That's all I've got today. Pretty much right on time too. So if there's any more Game Jam Life pro tips, I want to hear some in chat. I want to hear some in the comments. If you have any questions for the next 5 minutes, I am happy to go back and check out some other slides and go a little more in depth. But aside from that, thank you everybody and happy jamming.
Just me. Let's do this one. Yes. Yeah, no, we'll do this one. All right, Connor, thank you so much for that talk. I think definitely I was really blown away by that part over Audacity, where you sort of like you could take that recording that you had, the 4-second recording, and really make it sound like something completely different. Like I when you hear that, you picture a game in front of you. You don't picture someone speaking for 4 seconds, and so super amazing, super cool.
I have put so many sounds through there. It's amazing what you can get out sometimes. Just try everything.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's a lot of playing to do with that, I imagine. I always think of like Blender Guru on YouTube being able to show off a lot of like really nifty stuff with Blender, but I'd like to see some hacker who's just like, okay, today in Audacity we're going to combine these 20 filters and listen to what we make.
Oh yeah, I've written up some documents for, okay, I need to apply these 10 filters and that's going to make me sound really good. And it's just stacks of filters that do weird stuff.
Nice. Yeah, we love to see it. One question I did have, so I was trying to think of like my game jam life pro tips, but I was thinking, what isn't it like, or think back to the jams that you've done, the games that you've made. What's one example of sort of ways that you made use of these skills to make something that you're really proud of from a jam, or like you were just like really happy that you're like, I'm happy I found the solution. I didn't have to spend 10 hours trying to come up with some asset or something like that. What I did worked, and it got me through the jam.
I think definitely my last rudimentary. My last rudimentary I kind of showed I won't go back to it, but it was a what do you want to call it? Commodore 64-esque game. And it was full pixel art. I tried to get the full like kind of old school Commodore 64 Atari vibe with it. And I was sitting there and I was like, oh, I want to focus on the aesthetic. I want this one to look good and sound good and all this. And I want to experiment with it. And when it came to the visuals, I was like, how am I going to make nice looking? It's a guy walking across and he has to swing a shovel at zombies and then pick up the zombie bodies and drop them into a hole and all this stuff. And I was like, well, where am I going to find this stuff? Where am I going to find these assets? What am I going to do? And then I just kind of drew a square and then a line and 2 legs. And I was like, oh, hey, that's my ass. And I was happy with it. And then I did that. And then I was like, oh, I need to have digging. So I made a black square and that black square was my ground for the game. And then I was like, well, you're digging. So I'm going to erase some pixels and then I'm going to erase more pixels and more pixels. And I just erase stuff. And that worked. And then I said, I need to make some sound effects, and I did SFXer and just randomized all my sound effects. And then I got tons of comments on Ludum and Twitch players saying like, "Oh, the visual aesthetic and the sounds are so amazing. Like, it's really good. You nailed it." And I'm like, "Yay!" It was mostly just hitting random buttons and drawing stick men.
Yeah, that's some great feedback to get, I think, especially like when you sort of throw something together, but then the way that it resonates with people can just be completely different than you'd imagine it would do. And I think
Mhm.
this comes down a lot when you're creating a horror game where like you're like, okay, so it was supposed to be scary, but it's really just like a whole bunch of like weird sound effects and stuff happening. But then people play it and they're actually scared, and that always just blows me away when that happens.
Yeah, like you know what you did to make those things. They don't. So you're like,
Yeah,
"Oh, well, that took me 5 seconds. I just kind of whipped it up." And to them, it's like, "Wow, this is impressive. It works together." And you won't think that while you're making them.
yeah,
So,
absolutely.
worth
Yeah.
keeping in mind.
Exactly. Yeah, so I think that's it for questions that we have. So
Sounds
just a
good.
reminder for any jammers who are participating in real time, this was the last talk for today. We're back tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. with a talk on open source game development. And for tonight, we got another hour before we're closing off for the evening. So make sure that you keep working on the design. Also, a reminder that I've sort of thought of while talking to some of the jammers. What you come up with tonight doesn't need to be what you finish with on Sunday. And tomorrow morning, you're going to wake up and
Absolutely.
you're going to have criticisms of your ideas. And so, definitely making sure that you reassess your idea. You don't lock in on what you've developed tonight, what you've designed tonight. This is super important for the jam.
Yep. Be flexible. Don't drop an idea because you're suddenly like sad and you're like, "Oh, well, now we have to come up with something from scratch." But if you really just no, we are excited about this new idea. Do it. Go for it. Like pivoting is fine. Be flexible. Change stuff up. It's great.
Exactly. All right. So, thank you very much, Connor. And we will see everybody tomorrow morning.
Take care.